As many of you know who are regular attendees, I have been giving talks at this meeting on various topics, ranging from saturated fats to state power and Shakespeare. For this one, I would like to address the subject of the American military. I come from a military background. My father and maternal grandfather were career Navy surgeons and fought in World War II and won respectively. My great-great-grandfather, Lewis Hicks, fought with Stonewall Jackson up to Chancellorsville and led the 20th North Carolina Regiment in the Battle of Gettysburg. And I served on active duty in the Navy Medical Corps as Lieutenant Commander in the Vietnam War. This talk will focus on America's war machine as it is today compared with Russia. When World War II ended with 2 atom bombs dropped on Japan, the United States emerged as a superpower. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991 with Russia struggling, the US became the world's sole superpower, militarily supreme. In his State of the Union address just 3 years ago, President Obama, citing sanctions his administration imposed on Russia, said, quote, "Russia is isolated with its economy in tatters." Senator John McCain put it this way: "Look, Russia is a gas station masquerading as a country." The US military has sustained its post-war global dominance with 800 military bases and installations in 150 countries encircling the globe. Russia has only 14 military bases outside its current borders, 11 of them in the former Soviet republics. The US military has 1,300,000 active duty servicemen and women. Nearly 200,000 are stationed in other countries, as shown on this slide. Russia has 1 million active duty personnel. The carrier-centric US Navy currently has 11 aircraft carriers, 10 Nimitz class that cost $6 billion each, and 1 Gerald Ford class carrier that costs $13 billion. 2 more Ford class carriers are under construction, 2 ordered, and 10 more planned. Russia has 1 carrier. The Navy has 71 submarines, about the same as Russia. 14 of them are Columbia-class ballistic missile submarines. The military budget for fiscal year 2019 will be $716 billion. Add to that $70 billion for Homeland Security, another $70 billion for the nation's 16 intelligence agencies, and $186 billion for veterans benefits. And the US spends more than $1 trillion a year on defense, in quotes. $2 trillion cover yearly mandatory expenses for Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and interest on the federal debt, leaving less than $1 trillion for the rest of the country's expenses. Russia's military budget is $61 billion a year, far less than 10% of that of the US. Given all these facts, Russia would appear to be no match against the US military. Thinking this way, on February 2nd, the government released its 2018 Nuclear Posture Review, US Nuclear Deterrence Policy, Strategy, and Force Posture, updating the one that was published in 2010. The review states, expanding flexible US nuclear options now to include low-yield options is important for the preservation of credible deterrence against regional aggression. Adding, DoD and National Nuclear Security Administration will develop for deployment low-yield submarine-launched ballistic missiles warheads to ensure prompt response option that is able to penetrate adversary defenses. In the DoD's view, low-yield nukes should be in its military toolbox available for use with conventional weapons. Low-yield tactical nuclear weapons are set at 5 to 6.5 kilotons and below, having 1/3 the power of the little boy atom bomb America dropped on Hiroshima. A month later, President Vladimir Putin gave his annual State of the Nation speech to the Russian Federal Assembly in Moscow. The last third focused on nuclear weapons. He unveiled 6 new weapon systems and showed a short video of each one on screens flanking the stage. Putin warned, quote, "Any use of nuclear weapons against Russia or its allies, weapons of short, medium, or any range at all, will be considered as a nuclear attack on this country. Retaliation will be immediate and all the attendant consequences. There should be no doubt about this whatsoever." The weapon systems President Putin unveiled in his March 1 speech, if real, checkmate U.S. military supremacy. Putin showed a video simulation of Russia's new RS-28 Sarmat heavy intercontinental ballistic missile from launch to release of the nuclear missile's warheads over the target area. A mini nuclear reactor powers this 120-foot long, 220-ton ballistic missile. It can place a 10-ton payload in near-Earth orbit. Information on the miniaturized nuclear reactor is classified. The capsule containing the nuclear warheads orbits around the South Pole, thus being able to release them on American targets from the south side of the country, bypassing its missile defense system pointed north to intercept ICBMs coming straight from Russia over the North Pole. The Sarmat's re-entry vehicles / warheads, flying suborbital, maneuver and plunge suddenly towards their target. The video of the Sarmat ICBM that he showed has its nuclear warheads released and pointed towards Florida. The RS-28 Sarmat proceeds through these 5 stages, from launch to deploying its nuclear warheads over the target area. Russia has already placed 7 of these nuclear-powered ICBMs in silos and reportedly plans to place 50 more of them by 2020, according to the American think tank Center for Strategic and International Studies. This is the Sarmat 28 on parade. And you can say it's quite a gas station that makes something like this. The next weapon President Putin unveiled was the Kinzhal hypersonic missile, a high-altitude aircraft like this MiG-31BM launches it at 60,000 feet. This missile is 26 feet long, can accelerate to a speed of Mach 10, 7,500 miles per hour, and executes evasive maneuvers along its flight trajectory. As Putin put it, this enables the missile to penetrate all existing and projected air defense systems and deliver a nuclear or conventional warhead over a distance in excess of 1,200 miles. This missile is said to have passed its firing trials and has been placed on duty in Russia's southern military district, covering the Black Sea and Crimea. The Kinzhal missile's speed alone makes it immune to all current air defenses. As military analyst Andrei Martyanov states, this is a complete game changer, geopolitically, strategically, experimentally, tactically, and psychologically. This dagger missile, Kinzhal is a Russian word for dagger, made its debut at Russia's May 9, 2018 Victory Day parade, celebrating the 73rd anniversary of its victory over Nazi Germany in the Great Patriotic War of 1941 to 45. More than 13,000 servicemen and women participated in this Victory Day parade. It included tons of military hardware, including a new unmanned robot tank. It included a contingent of women troops. In World War II, Russia and its Soviet republics suffered 27 million military and civilian deaths in a population of less than 200 million. The United States had 420,000 deaths. For each American that died in that war, 64 Russians perished. Supersonic speed is Mach 1.2 to 5. Hypersonic speed is greater than Mach 5. There are two basic types of supersonic weapons: hypersonic cruise missiles and hypersonic glide vehicles. One of these weapons that President Putin unveiled in his speech is the Avantgarde hypersonic glide vehicle, launched by the RS-28 Sarmat ICBM. The Avantgarde vehicle flies in the atmosphere at Mach 20, 15,000 miles per hour. President Putin described it this way, quote, "It flies to its target like a meteorite, like a ball of fire. The temperature on its surface is 1,600 to 2,000 degrees centigrade. That's 3,600 degrees Fahrenheit. But the cruise block nevertheless stays reliably guided. The temperature on the surface of the sun," I should have checked this with Willie, but I have it as 10,800 degrees Fahrenheit, which is just 3 times temperature on the glide vehicle. The RS-28 Sarmat holds 16 hypersonic glide vehicles, each one containing a 500 kiloton nuclear warhead. President Putin also unveiled a nuclear-powered, precision-guided missile, cruise missile, that he claims can fly indefinitely and deliver a nuclear or conventional warhead to any point on the Earth's surface, including any point in the United States. His animated video of it showed a low-flying, terrain-hugging missile closely clearing mountain peaks and then all around the world evading missile defenses. He said, in late 2017, Russia successfully launched its latest nuclear-powered missile at the Central Training Ground. During its flight, the nuclear engine reached its design capacity and provided the necessary propulsion. Asked about it, the Russian Deputy Defense Minister Yuri Borisov said, "As you might guess, the missile is launched using conventional power boosters, and then the reactor kicks in. This must happen very quickly. Several hours are needed to get the reactor on a nuclear submarine to operational power, but in this case, it happens in a matter of seconds." He confirmed that this global-range nuclear-powered cruise missile is, quote, not a bluff, but a new reality. This ground-launched nuclear missile remains in the testing phase. President Putin showed this computer-generated image of Russia's new unmanned, fast-moving underwater nuclear drone. This weapon has a 5,000-mile range, can travel at 56 to 80 knots at 65 to 92 miles per hour, and can descend to a depth of 3,000 feet. America's Defense News confirms that it is real. And the U.S. Nuclear Posture Review also confirms the drone's existence, calling it a Status 6 AUV for autonomous underwater vehicle. This illustrative blueprint shows the drone to be 79 feet long and 5 feet in diameter. The mini-nuclear reactor that powers it is 100 times smaller than the nuclear reactors that powers submarines. It carries a thermonuclear warhead that has been variously reported as 2 to 50 to 100 megatons, containing cobalt-59 that releases high amounts of cobalt-60, which is highly radioactive, producing radioactive fallout. Detonated underwater next to the coasts of North America, it will create a radioactive tsunami wave 1,500 feet high that will drown and destroy coastal cities like New York and Los Angeles. The sixth weapon President Putin unveiled is a combat laser. He said, "I do not want to reveal more details. It is not the time yet. But experts will understand that with such weaponry, Russia's defense capacity has multiplied." Viktor Murakovsky, editor-in-chief of the Russian magazine Arsenal of the Fatherland, states, "Probably this complex solves the problem of anti-missile defense. The use of a laser beam is far more economical than the use of standard missiles. At the same time, its accuracy is far greater. A laser beam bullet, if you will, goes at the speed of light. The elusive megawatt combat laser needs two things: good beam quality and good SWAP, SWAP for size, weight, and power. A miniaturized nuclear reactor, which Russian scientists and engineers have built for its Sarmat ICBM, new nuclear-powered cruise missile and underwater drone, solves the SWAP part of the equation, particularly for a megawatt combat laser. A mini nuclear reactor in the front part of the truck is what most likely powers the laser. There are 6 weapon systems, therefore, that Vladimir Putin unveiled in his March 1, 2018 speech. He invited Russians to submit names for the 3 yet unnamed weapons on a web portal set up for that purpose. For the underwater drone, they chose Poseidon, after the Greek god of the sea. For the nuclear-powered cruise missile, Russians chose Preparedness, the Russian name for the storm petrel seabird, whose presence mariners believe foretells bad weather. And for the combat laser, Preparedness, after the medieval warrior monk Alexander Preparedness, who died taking part in a 14th century battle against the invading Mongols. The U.S. has no such weapons, no hypersonic missiles or glide vehicles, no nuclear-powered cruise missiles or underwater drones, and no megawatt combat lasers. On March 20th, General John Hyten, commander of the U.S. Strategic Command, reported to the U.S. Senate Committee on Armed Services We don't have any defense that could deny employment of such weapons against us. He is referring here to hypersonic weapons. Senator James Inhofe, the senior member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, acknowledged, "Right now we're helpless." General Hyten went on to say, "So our response would be our deterrent force, which would be the triad and the nuclear capabilities that we have to respond to such a threat." The nuclear triad he refers to, of course, is sea-based submarine-launched ballistic missiles, land-based intercontinental ballistic missile, and airborne nuclear-armed bombers. What if the next time the U.S. military fires Tomahawk missiles into Syria or Iran, and Russia responds by not only shooting down the missiles, but as it has threatened to do, also destroys the source of origin? A Kinzhal hypersonic missile armed with a conventional weapon strikes and sinks the aircraft carrier from which the planes carrying the missiles were launched or took off. Would America really respond to the sinking of one of its aircraft carriers by starting a first strike nuclear war? Aircraft carriers have become sitting ducks. They are defenseless against hypersonic weapons. Attacking and sinking a U.S. carrier with a hypersonic missile anywhere on the planet gives Russia what analysts call escalation dominance, which the United States cannot counter in kind. There aren't any Russian targets with an actual and symbolic value of a U.S. aircraft carrier with its 85 jet fighters and 3,000 crew members. The United States trails Russia in a variety of other weapon systems, among them fifth-generation jet fighters, littoral combat ships, littoral meaning close to shore, ballistic missile submarines, mobile anti-aircraft systems, and helicopters. The DoD awarded Lockheed Martin a contract in 2001 to build a fifth-generation jet fighter that would fulfill the requirements not only of the Air Force, but also for the Navy, flying them on and off carriers, and for the Marines, with their being able to provide close air battlefield support. The Marine Corps insisted that the new F-35 Joint Strike Fighter have a vertical takeoff and landing capability, VTOL, like a helicopter. This requirement to provide space for a VTOL lift fan effectively spoiled the airframe for the F-35. The Air Force F-35A has a wingspan of 35 feet and a wing surface area of 460 square feet. Not enough wing area to fly low and slow. The Navy F-35B has a larger 43-foot wingspan with a wing area of 620 square feet, making it able to fly slow enough to remain airborne and land safely on an aircraft carrier and not fall into the ocean on takeoff. The Marine F-35C has the same wingspan as the Air Force version, which prevents it from flying low and slow enough for close air battlefield support. The F-35 is turning out to be a second-rate combat aircraft, less able to perform its mission than the legacy F-16 it is designed to replace. Although not widely reported, in a staged dogfight, the F-35 proved no match against the 40-year-old F-16. Robert Dorey, in his book, Air Power Abandoned, writes, "The F-35 demonstrates repeatedly that it can't live up to the promises made for it. It's that bad." Examining flight evaluation reports, Defense spending analyst Winslow Wheeler concluded that the F-35, quote, is flawed beyond redemption. And Pierre Spray, co-designer of the F-15, calls the F-35 inherently a terrible airplane. Lockheed Martin in California runs the F-35 program with 1,400 subcontractors distributed throughout 46 states, shoring up congressional support for the program. The DoD originally planned to buy 2,400 F-35s. The program is a decade behind schedule, and so far, a little more than 300 of them have been sold. Their cost continues to rise. Now, some say, topping $200 million a plane. The helmet alone for the pilot costs $600,000. Nevertheless, the Pentagon, with congressional support, has declared the F-35 program too big to fail. You could call this collective corruption. The gas station, masquerading as a country, has built a highly acclaimed fifth-generation jet fighter, the Su-57. In contrast to the F-35, it has a broad, aesthetically appealing wingspan. Fifth-generation aircraft, or jet fighters, have 4 features: stealth, supersonic cruise, and that's the ability to maintain supersonic flight without afterburners; super maneuverability with the use of canards, thrust-vectoring engine nozzles, and sensor fusion, highly integrated computer systems capable of networking with other elements to provide all-around situational awareness. The F-35 is not, as advertised, a fifth-generation aircraft because it cannot maintain supersonic flight without afterburners. It can only fly up to Mach 1.2 for 150 miles without them. 2 Su-57s flew over the Kremlin in their debut at this year's May 9 Victory Day parade. Multi-role littoral combat ships is another area where Russia has achieved technological advantage. The new Russian corvette, Vasily Baikov, has half the displacement of the US littoral combat ships, but still can carry and fire the caliber NK land attack missile, something the US Navy needs destroyers and cruisers for. The caliber NK missile has a 1,500-mile range and proved its worth when Russia fired it from ships in the Caspian Sea against terrorist targets in Syria over 900 miles away. The missile comes armed with either conventional or nuclear warheads. This Russian corvette has an arsenal ranging from surface-to-air interceptors to an inflatable boat that a commando team can use to liberate civilian hostages in a vessel held by pirates. One respected military correspondent writes that this corvette has a pretty genius design, with a small frame providing great strike power. In contrast, the USS Freedom, one of the new class of American littoral combat ships, has trouble passing inspections. According to a government accounting office, GAO report, these ships have taken longer to build, cost more, and delivered less than expected. They go fast, up to 40 knots, but the ship's 30 and 57 millimeter guns, quote, exhibit reliability problems and may be dysfunctional at high speeds. Inspection tests show problems with the firefighting and electrical systems, along with generator meltdowns, computer system failures, and burst pipes. The GAO report states, the Navy attributed a series of engineering casualties on littoral combat ships to shortfalls in crew training, they put that first, C-frame design, and construction quality. The United States also lags Russia in nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines. The U.S. fleet has 14 of them, all Ohio-class submarines. The first one, the USS Ohio, is now 37 years old and still in active service. The youngest one, the USS Louisiana, has been in service for 20 years. The DoD plans to replace them with 12 Columbia-class fourth-generation electrically run, quiet ballistic missile submarines. Production is scheduled to begin in 2021, with the first one becoming operation in 2031. Russia has already launched 3 of its Bory-class fourth-generation submarine, ballistic missile submarines, and 5 more are under construction. The first one is fully operational and joined Russia's Northern Fleet in 2014. The U.S. Columbia-class submarines are presently estimated to cost $10 each, but its cost will certainly go up following discovery earlier this month of faulty welding in missile tubes destined for this project. The same generation, same size Russian Bory-class missile submarines cost $1 billion each. The Russian S-400 Triumph multifunctional anti-aircraft system is designed to destroy aircraft, crews, and ballistic missiles, and even ground objectives 240 miles away. China was the first country after Russia to purchase and obtain the S-400, which comes with multi-function radar complexes that can track aircraft employing stealth technology like the F-35. Turkey, India, and Saudi Arabia also want to purchase the S-400 instead of the American Patriot system. Military analysts say it is an open secret that the S-400 is much more capable than the American Patriot air defense system. The 17-year-old Afghan war, now called Operation Freedom Sentinel, American and Afghan troops used the Russian Mi-17 helicopters, but Congress is no longer going to allow them to buy Russian helicopters. They will have to use the U.S. Black Hawk helicopters instead. But a recent report to Congress, in the report, the Inspector General for Overseas Contingency Operations makes this assessment of the matter. Black Hawks do not have the lift capacity of Mi-17s. They are unable to accommodate some of the larger cargo items the Mi-17s can carry. And in general, it takes almost 2 Black Hawks to carry a load of a single Mi-17. Furthermore, unlike Mi-17s, Black Hawks cannot fly at high altitudes and as such cannot operate in regions of Afghanistan where Mi-17s operate. This map shows the U.S. military bases in the Middle East. Golden Triangle, where a large amount of the known oil in the world resides. Note Djibouti, strategically located in the Horn of Africa at the southern entrance to the Red Sea and Suez Canal. The U.S. built Camp Lemonnier in Djibouti after 9/11, and in 2008 made it the home of the new U.S. Africa Command. The base can house up to 4,000 soldiers. More recently, however, China made a deal with Djibouti to build its first overseas military base in that country, with permission to house up to 10,000 soldiers in its garrison. The Chinese base is located just a few miles from the American one. Intelligence sources say that the Chinese base operates a high-power laser weapon that can temporarily blind personnel at the neighboring U.S. base. A Pentagon spokesman stated that pilots flying a C-130 over the base experienced dizziness and seen rings after being exposed to a laser beam. The base commander has warned pilots about this. Why bring this up? This is not the way a Washington-run unipolar world is supposed to go. The USA was a pioneer in nuclear power. Ted Rockwell, who played an important role in its development, describes the dawn of the atomic age in a most engaging fashion in his book, Celebrating the New World, Stories and Images from the Dawn of the Atomic Age. After the Manhattan Project produced the first uranium and plutonium atomic bombs, the Army next tested a thermonuclear fusion weapon, the 10-megaton Ivy Mike, on an atoll in the Marshall Islands in 1952. In 1951, an experimental breeder reactor in Arco, Idaho, was the first reactor to generate significant amounts of electrical power. Then Admiral Rickover and his team built and launched the first nuclear-powered submarine, the USS Nautilus, in 1954. The first commercial electric generating power plant was powering electricity and nuclear energy came online in Shippingport, Pennsylvania in 1958. Of 96 nuclear power plants built in the U.S., 35 have closed. No new ones have been ordered since 1974, and several are scheduled for closure in the next few years. The 61 plants still operating in 30 states house 99 nuclear reactors that provide 20% of the nation's electricity. The first new nuclear reactor to be built in a long time was a plant in Tennessee in 2016. 2 reactors under construction at a plant in South Carolina were recently canceled, halfway completed, when Westinghouse filed for bankruptcy. But 2 other nuclear reactors remain under construction at a plant in Georgia, shown here. They are scheduled to come online in 2022 and 23. Myriad regulations and environmental strictures, wedded to the linear no-threshold view of radiation, make building new nuclear power plants in the U.S. virtually impossible and threaten completion of the 2 nuclear reactors under construction in Georgia. Russia now has 37 nuclear reactors, with 5 more under construction and 20 more planned. And Russia is also building 34 new nuclear reactors in 12 countries, China, Iran, and India among them. In addition to miniature nuclear reactors powering various weapon systems, Russian scientists have become leaders in fast neutron technology for nuclear reactors. And Russia is also building floating nuclear power plants. The first one, the Akademik Lomonosov, it has 2 nuclear reactors that produce 35 megawatts of electricity and 150 megawatts of heat. And it also can desalinate salt water. This floating nuclear power plant is being towed in the Baltic to Murmansk for fuel loading, and then it will go to the Arctic town of Pevek. The American anti-nuclear environmental left has labeled this floating nuclear power plant Chernobyl on ice and the nuclear Titanic. Its reactors are modified Soviet KLT-40 naval propulsion reactors made for their nuclear-powered icebreakers. Designed to be mass-produced, Russia plans to buy 7 of them, and so far 15 other countries are interested in acquiring one. This illustration shows one hooked up and providing power to a town in the Arctic. At the 2005 DDP meeting, the late Saul Penner professor of propulsion at Caltech, and then founding chair of the San Diego Center for Energy Research at UCSD, presented facts that support the predictions that humans will use predominantly nuclear energy in the future. As one insightful commentator observes, Russia's decision to invest in nuclear energy capabilities is a brilliant strategic move befitting a nation of chess players. Art Robinson, in the April issue of his Access to Energy newsletter, points out that in future years, Russia, China, and India will possess most of the world's nuclear power, and therefore will have most of the world's heavy industry, for whom energy is a major expense. With American energy costing 3 to 6 times more than Asian energy, the contest for heavy industry will be over. The US will be on the road, becoming a third world economy. China has also designed a floating nuclear power plant and plans to build 20 of them. Air Force General Robert Latif, in his book Future War, published in 2017, writes, "War and technology have defined our history. Americans spend vast sums on weapons and aggressively export our weapons to others. We assume our technological superiority, an assumption that is increasingly challenged and that has potentially dangerous consequences if we think it will allow us to impose our will on others. Make no mistake, the willful ignorance of the American public and its leaders have dangerous consequences." Vladimir Putin's speech on March 1, 2018 ended U.S. military supremacy. One might say publicly ended U.S. military supremacy. In addition to lagging behind Russia in hypersonic weapons and nuclear technology, our military is also saddled with problematic, inferior, and obsolete weapon systems like the F-35, aircraft carriers, ballistic missile submarines, and helicopters. It makes little sense for Washington to spend $200 billion tax dollars on 14 new Ford aircraft carriers when hypersonic weapons have rendered them obsolete and turned aircraft carriers into floating death traps. The United States is no longer the world's technologically superior superpower. Russia is. Adhering to the principle of mutually assured destruction, the United States and the Soviet Union maintained a long peace, as Vladimir Putin notes and John Lewis Gates writes about in his book with that title. It was a 40-year-long peace. President Eisenhower, questioned on the use of tactical atomic weapons in any small war which the United States might be involved in, said, "Any such operation is just another way of committing suicide. And there is no such thing as a limited atomic war." As happened with Sputnik in the Cold War space race, our country is now in a Cold War 2.0, and this time in a hypersonic weapons race. Once again, the U.S. finds itself behind Russia and China in this race. After Putin's speech, Congress awarded Lockheed Martin $1 billion to design and produce an American hypersonic missile. And 2 weeks ago, Congress gave this weapon manufacturer another $500 million for this project, with the promise of more to come. The Cold War carries a heightened risk for turning into a nuclear war, with Washington's neoconservatives and neoliberal interventionists demonizing Putin, pushing war, and thinking the U.S. can get away with using tactical nuclear weapons in regional conflicts. The 21st century Cold War has already triggered an economic war when the United States started imposing sanctions on Russia in 2014. Invaded by Sweden under King Charles in the 18th century, by France under Napoleon in the 19th century, and by the Nazis under Hitler in the 20th century, it is fair to say the Russian people want peace, and as does their president. But what if something happens to Putin and a hardline military general like a Dr. Strangelove becomes president of Russia and takes control of its nuclear arsenal, or terrorists get a hold of nukes? And by not objecting to the use of battlefield nuclear weapons, America's neoconservative and neoliberal interventionists seem to have shoved the adage, a nuclear war cannot be unleashed because it is unwinnable, down the memory hole. It behooves us to once again heed Crescent Carney and hone our nuclear war survival skills. Disaster preparedness for nuclear war is now more important than ever. Thank you. Welcome any questions or comments.
Ken Hoppola, what is the advantage of a floating nuclear power plant versus a land-based one?
The 7 that Russia are purchasing are all going to the Arctic, to Arctic towns where it can provide power, plus desalinate salt water. And Puerto Rico could have used one, and would have helped them a lot with their loss of electricity on the island.
Cecil Bumer here. I was there the day they rolled out the F-22. I noticed that was missing. Now, that's our stealth Mach 2.0 fighter without afterburners. Why wasn't that on our
Well, that's a good question. That program was canceled.
Well, they've already used them in Syria.
Well, they still have some. I forget
Yes.
the number. They may have 20 or 30 of them, but they're not making any more.
Okay.
Of course, I spoke before. Our main writer on strategy is William Lind. I think many people know his name. And he writes on the American defense budget how much is incredibly wasted, of course, by the lobbying in Washington. 40 states have input in the F-35. They start producing weapons before they've been tested in a whole bunch of ways. My question, and I've written a lot on defense waste. My article's at the top of Google search, still John Utley, and how to cut the waste. Why is what you're saying is new to me, and I follow a lot of this. It's not reported in the media. You'd think they're always trying to terrify us, and yet anything that gives this, what it really does is expose the waste in our own budget. How come it's not reported elsewhere? Or where is it? Where is it reported, the kind of things you're talking?
The Defense News has a daily, you get it on email, a daily list of news regarding the defense. They never talk about any of this stuff. And they proudly say that the Ford-class carriers, $12.9 billion, that sounds better than 13. So you can find it, but you have to look it's all of this information I was able to obtain online, but you have to look at a lot of different places to find it, but it's out there. And there's no question, I mean, the example of the Columbia-class submarine, none have been built yet, and they're going to be $10 billion. The Boeing-class are out at $1 billion. It's interesting that the cost of the weapons are 10 times what they cost to make in Russia, and that's the difference in the defense budgets. The U.S. defense budget is 10 times more. It's $1 trillion now versus the Russian one. So there's just so much corruption involved with payoffs to congressmen and subcontractors. It's pretty shocking when you finally get to look into it.
Can I add, we're having a foreign policy conference, a magazine sponsored with Rand Paul in the Congress in the fall, if you keep an eye on the American conservative.
Good, I'm glad you're doing that.
Thank you for a depressing talk.
Yeah, following Chris Farrell's talk, the two going together don't help your appetite too much.
How would you suggest that we improve matters?
Well, I think the best way to improve matters is start closing our 800 military bases, installations around the country. We have no reason to be the world's policeman, and we can't afford it. We're going bankrupt with it, and we need to stop trying to put our power over others.
Do you suggest closing just domestic bases or also some of the foreign ones?
Well, there are 5,000 domestic bases, and it's going to be a very difficult thing with Congress and so forth to ever close it. I mean, every time they try and close a base in any state, there's a total uproar. But they could get away with closing the foreign bases more, and we shouldn't be messing around with all those things anyway.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm Jerry Cutler. I've been looking at health effects of low-dose radiation. I've been following the survivors, the firefighters at Chernobyl. There was 134 who suffered acute radiation syndrome. They were trying to extinguish burning graphite reactor core after the explosion. So there were 134 treated for acute radiation syndrome. 28 of them died within a few weeks, months, and 106 recovered. And these 106 have been tracked for 20 years. And when I say recovered, they recovered within a year. They were looking like normal people. And when you track the mortality of them after 20 years, it's the same as the non-irradiated Russian, Ukraine people in that area. And if you look at their cancer incidence, it's no different than non-irradiated people. What this is telling us, you may argue, well, 106 people is not a very big sample, but it's certainly a pretty good indication in my book. It shows that if the radiation doesn't kill the people, these workers survive, and they're almost the same as unexposed people. And so this fear that everyone is communicating about long-term effects of radiation, low dose, high dose, is not real. And we now will have information of not just 20 years, 30 years survival of these 106 people that are being tracked. I've asked for that information, and I expect it will be no different than what we've learned from the 20-year follow-up. 30-year follow-up is going to be pretty much the same. That after you recover from this intense exposure, you're not much different than normal people who were not exposed. So this is these facts that we should look at. And the important thing is to communicate this to, of course, the media, but you need to communicate it to all these people of the country, the citizens. They need to know about what the real effects of radiation are, and not the scaremongering that was communicated in the 1950s.
Well, I share your views on low-dose radiation. I'm glad you're going to be talking to us about it later today. And if you really wanted to minimize cancer, a good place to have lived would have been in those apartment buildings in Taiwan that were built with concrete that had cobalt-60 releasing radiation, and turned out the incidence of cancer of the people living in those buildings was a small fraction of the average of the people in that country. So I think
I see flooded with Taiwan, but there's an island, Icaria. It's one of the archipelago of Greece island, and the cancer patients outlive their doctors there. And there was an interesting article in CNN about 5 years ago about a fellow who received a death sentence from his doctor. It was actually more than that. It's 20 years ago it happened. And so decided he would go back to his homeland and wait out to the end. And he did quite well. Disease went into remission. And he came back to visit the U.S. and he found his doctors were all dead.
thank you.